Wait. How is it the first supermarket? The Piggly Wiggly's older. What? Huh? King Cullen meets five criteria. Separate departments, self-service, discount pricing, okay, chain marketing, and volume dealing. I did not know that. But wait, what about Piggly Wiggly? Oh, Piggly Wiggly was the first self-service. Oh, look, man, I gotta go, okay? Yeah. Hi.
This month's main headline, the votes are in.
Communist Party, the strongest party in Berlin. The stock exchange trembles at the communist victory. Now, mass promotion for the party and press across the board.
Warning, fascist danger. The communists can only make it worse. Of the 35 million who went to the polls on Sunday, 6.4 million voted for Hitler's Third Reich.
The cabinet remains. Outcome of today's meeting. Continuation of reform efforts. Bruning stays. Reichstag session begins in early October.
The referendum of September 14th, an event unprecedented in political history. Victory is ours. Germany awakens.
I'm Indy Neidell.
I'm Spartacus Olsson.
And this is The Rise of Hitler. Welcome to the Weimar Wire. Today, with a special feature, the Weimar Wire Election Report, covering the September election results, analyzing the performance of the various parties, and seeing what this means for Germany.
On the 14th, all Germans are asked to cast their vote in parliamentary elections. These elections are pivotal for a variety of reasons. For one, they take place during the global economic crisis that very much affects the German Reich. Unemployment has skyrocketed compared to last year, and wages are falling. It is the heavy industries like mining and construction that have been hit the hardest.
Political violence in the streets has increased the last couple of months. The far-flung corners of the political spectrum, the Nazis on the far right and the communists on the far left, have used not only rhetoric, but fists and bullets to illustrate their points, mostly to each other.
All the while, the traditional right-wing party, the German National People's Party, DNVP, has struggled with its own identity. Once the largest party in Germany, it has weakened and even splintered in the search for a path forward.
Most of the center-right liberals, like the German People's Party, DVP, and the Economy Party, WP, have not splintered, but have also chosen a new direction.
They have formed an alliance for the election, and as a result, a new political bloc has emerged. Joining forces, they retain their individual approaches while collectively advocating for the current government policies under Chancellor Brüning: budgetary reform and austerity.
The former DDP is now called the German State Party, the DSTP, and has made a decisive swing to the right through an alliance with anti-Semitic right-wing organizations. As a result, though, it too has splintered, with the left wing forming the small, radical German Democratic Party.
The party of Chancellor Brüning, Centrum, the Catholic Conservative Center Party, sees no reason to change course.
The Social Democrats, the SPD, the largest party in Germany, well, they're also firmly in the opposition, not by choice, but primarily because German President Paul von Hindenburg wants it that way.
The Social Democrats criticized the use of Article 48, governing by presidential decree, and it was they who got Parliament dissolved because of it. They agree that budgetary reform is needed, but vehemently disagree about where the money should come from. Not by saving on services for the poor, but taxes for the wealthy.
In any case, an overarching development is that the opposition to democracy and the young Weimar Republic grows and grows, and not just from the communists and the Nazis.
By this election, there are only two significant parties that we can really call democratic in the liberal sense of the word: Centrum and the Social Democrats. The State Party is also democratic, but their new anti-Semitic orientation makes them not liberal. All other parties range from indifferent to hostile to democracy.
Let's get to the election results. On the 16th, the votes are in and counted. Now, we don't have the time to rank the many small and regional parties that characterize the Weimar political landscape. And there are 413,000 votes cast this election for parties that do not get a seat in parliament. That is 1.2% of all votes.
That leaves us with the Social Democrats, Centrum, the Bürger Alliance, the German State Party, the German People's Party, the Nazis, and the Communists.
The party with the most votes remains the Social Democrats. 8.5 million Germans decide to go with the tempered Marxists and vote for democracy. 24.5% of all votes, nearly a quarter, and 143 seats in parliament.
So they managed to defend the top spot.
They do.
I guess being in the opposition for 5.5 months before the election has its advantages. But didn't they get almost 30% in the last election? If so, can they really be called winners?
Yes, they did, and no, they can't, but we'll get to that later. Now we're just listing most to least vote. That brings me to second place. Okay, wow. Second place, it's going to surprise you. Second place with 6.4 million votes, 18.3% of the vote, and 107 seats in parliament is the National Socialist Party under Adolf Hitler.
That's insane. That's more than 15% increase.
Yep.
That's 5.5 million more votes in just 2 years.
It's actually even more insane if you look at the number of seats in parliament. They go from 12 to 107. That is almost an 800% increase. No wonder Nazi MP and propagandist-in-chief Dr. Joseph Goebbels says this.
Overnight, the scorned and maligned little factions has transformed into a mass party of the highest order, and the victory it secured on September 14th is unparalleled in the entire history of political parties.
Wait, is that right? I guess even the famous SAP breakthrough, the forefather of the Social Democrats, in the 1890 election falls short of that. They nearly doubled their vote share over 3 years, but their 24-seat gain still pales in comparison. But wait, okay. What about the 1924 Italian elections when the National List went from like 0% to like 66% in just 3 years?
Yeah, that's right. But keep in mind that the 1924 election wasn't free and fair, and that the National List wasn't a single party, but a coalition of parties. But let's get on to number 3.
Okay, third place is rather tricky. If we look at single parties, then with 13.1% of the vote, 4.59 million votes for 77 seats, we have the German Communist Party, the KPD. That is a 2.5% gain compared to 1928. They also actually win overall in Berlin.
However, if we look at common platforms, we see a different picture emerge. Centrum has a sister party from Bavaria, the Bavarian People's Party.
They share election posters, and for most intents and purposes, they can be counted as one party. Together, they reach 14.8% of the vote, meaning 5.18 million Germans voted with the Catholics, giving them 87 seats in parliament.
Of that, Centrum makes up 11.6% or 4.06 million votes. On the face of it, these two parties only lost 0.4%.
Okay, what do you mean on the face of it? You lose, you win, right?
Well, not quite, but we'll get to that later. In fifth place is the Bürger Alliance.
Together, they get 10.5% of the votes and 53 seats in parliament with a support of 3.67 million Germans.
Compared to 1928, that's a decrease of 5.6%, 3.8 for the DVP and 1.8 for the WP.
Okay, then in our ranking is the German National People's Party, the DNVP, with some 2.46 million votes. That is 7% of the vote and 41 seats. So they continue their downward spiral, being down 7.2% or roughly 2 million votes from last time.
Last here comes the German State Party with 3.8%. That's 1.2 million votes and 20 seats. They are down 1.4% compared to 1928. But the biggest takeaway is perhaps that about 31% of Germans voted.
No. About 82% of all eligible voters voted.
About 31% of Germans voted for the far right and far left parties on the spectrum, giving them 184 out of 577 seats. Parties that will likely refuse cooperation with any government, at least not under conditions any of the other parties could accept.
Germany is now dangerously polarized. Potentially even more worrisome is this, though. Less than half of all Germans voted for parties which are pro-democracy and pro-Weimar Republic. If we count together Social Democrats, Centrum, the Bavarian affiliate, the State Party, even throw in the Economy Party, we get just 47.3 pro-democratic votes.
So here, September 1930, we have a Germany where almost 1/3 of people vote for the extreme left or right and fewer than half for democracy. But let's see what this means in terms of potential coalitions.
Okay, even though we already know that Bruning's cabinet plans to stick to its guns and continue forward, this is still an interesting hypothetical, right?
Brüning and his partners have failed to achieve their core election goal, a majority for their current reform program, being 162 seats short of a majority. It appears that governing by minority will continue. Even if they added the National People's Party, they'd still be 79 seats short, something highly improbable anyhow given the party's current rightward drift.
Another option would be a new, old Weimar coalition, same as the first ever coalition in the Young Republic's history, comprised of Centrum and its Bavarian sister party, and the Social Democrats and the State Party. But they are still 70 seats short of a majority.
There is also the Grand Coalition option that faltered in March this year. Social Democrats, Centrum, State Party, and the People's Party.
Right.
But they'd still be 28 seats short as well. Something they could change by adding the Economy Party. Then they'd have a majority.
Hey!
Yeah, but that's never going to fly because Hindenburg wants the Social Democrats nowhere near the wheel.
There is also, hypothetically, a socialist bloc option. However, the Communists and Social Democrats would together lack 135 seats. Besides, before those two would ever work together, we'd have to see, I don't know, like the rise of a fascist dictatorship or something.
Not even that's going to be enough. They really, and I mean really, despise each other. After all, the communist self-proclaimed biggest enemy is not the fascists, but the social fascists. That is to say, the SPD.
As unlikely as some of these proposed options are, any other ones are even more unlikely.
There is also a potential far-right alliance of the Nazis and the DNVP, both of which by now openly aim for a Third Reich, although they currently lack anything approaching a majority.
Well, let's get to the deeper analysis, okay? Who's the biggest loser, everything considered?
Well, from a single party point of view, the People's Party, the DNVP, suffered the biggest loss at 7.2%. But who's second is a more interesting question. The Social Democrats suffered a loss of 5.8%, which again, at face value and from a single party perspective, should make them number two.
But there's some other stuff we need to consider first that could change this. This election is different from previous elections. For one, we have more eligible voters than ever before. This year in Germany, there are about 42.9 million of them. In the last elections, 1928, there was only 41.2 million.
Added to the increased number of eligible voters is the unusually high voter turnout. In 1928, it was 74.6%, and now it is 81.3%.
Wow.
These two phenomena lead to an increase of 13.7% in the number of votes cast, from roughly 30.8 million in 28 to almost 35 million this month.
This can, and does, affect the assessment of the loser rankings. It is possible that a party increased its total number of votes compared to the last election while still losing overall percentage points, as is the case with the Catholic conservative Centrum. In the last elections, they won 11.9% of the vote. This election, it's 11.6%. So on the face of it, they lost voters. In reality, it's quite the contrary. The Chancellor's Party goes from 4.07 million to like 4.5 million votes.
So they gained more or less 11% in raw votes compared to 1928, while losing 0.3% of the total share of votes because of the larger pool of eligible voters and the number of valid votes cast.
Nevertheless, in the case of the Social Democrats, while this softens the blow, they remain second in the loser ranking. If we took the electorate of 1928 and their votes in this election, their performance would only decrease by roughly 3.7%, not 5.3%. If we look at the raw number of votes, however, their performance seems even worse, since compared to 1928, they lost 6% of their raw votes.
There is also another point to be made using data from earlier elections. In 1928, the Social Democrats had a high not seen since the first elections in 1919. If we look at the two elections in 1924, they got 20.5% and 26% respectively. So while all this relativizes their performance this time, it nevertheless still means they are number 2.
If we look at the blocks, though, rather than individual parties, the Burger Alliance takes second place. Together, they lose 5.7%. That's more than the Social Democrats. If we again take their votes from the 1930 election and apply them to the 1928 number of valid votes cast, they likewise fare better, down roughly 4.3%. But that's still more than the Social Democrats in the same conditions.
The rest are straightforward, though. The German State Party also lost. After that, there are only winners, beginning with the Centrum Bavarian Alliance, then the Communists, and finally the Nazis, who take first place by a large margin.
Why does Centrum do so much better than other parties with similar or the same policy goals? We saw 3 parties with similar platforms when we looked at it last month.
Well, as you already said, Centrum and by extension the BVP and the other parties we just talked about ran on very similar, dare I say, almost identical campaigns, essentially support what the Brüning government has done so far.
Right.
But there is a unique element to Centrum the other parties do not share. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
Well, let me think for a minute. Oh, yeah. Well, the Centrum is a Catholic party, right? So, going on from this, for some reason or other, the Catholic voters of Centrum and the Bavarian Party prove more loyal to their parties than the Protestant voters of the other parties?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
Let me illustrate by using a few state examples. First, Braunschweig, a state that is almost exclusively Protestant and agrarian, lacks any substantial industry. Here, Centrum only has 1.6% of
That's
the
not
vote.
very much. Wow. Well, you can compare that to Bavaria, which is almost exclusively Catholic, where Centrum gained just short of 30% of the vote. In mixed states, like Hessen-Darmstadt or Oldenburg, with a Catholic minority of 21 and 31% respectively, Centrum gets between 17 and 18% of the vote. In all these states, the other traditional bourgeois or middle-class parties all perform equally poorly.
Yeah, this pattern persists along urban and rural divides. The Catholics stick to their guns way more than the Protestants do.
Where do all those votes go? To answer that question, which I will, it seems logical to look at the party that gained the most votes, the Nazis. The largest share of the new Nazi voters comes from the Bürger Bloc, 31%, nearly a third of them.
Yeah, here we can further illustrate the exceptional circumstances of Centrum. 23%, nearly a quarter of those who voted for the Bürger parties in 1928 now vote for the Nazis, whereas only 9% of those who voted for Centrum in 1928 now vote for the Nazis. And importantly, 23% of the Nazi voters this election were non-voters in 1928.
Wow, that's nearly a quarter. That highlights nearly a quarter of non-voters in 1928.
Yes.
That people are, okay. Well, this really highlights that the Nazis have been the most successful at mobilizing voters.
21% of the Nazi votes come from the People's Party, the DNVP. This can be explained by the DNVP's current internal struggles, their loss of momentum since 1924, and the evidently more successful election and propaganda campaigns of the Nazis.
Well, the Nazis, they take the DNVP platform to the extreme.
Yep. Just 14% of the Nazi voters are those who already voted for them in 1928. 9% of the Nazis' 1930 voters were Social Democrat voters in 1928, and 2% come from a bunch of other parties. That's the whole 100%.
Wow. Okay, well, let me move on to another question. Who is the typical Nazi voter?
Yeah, well, this may surprise some of you, but there isn't really the Nazi voter. Some journalists and experts have brought forward the theory that the Nazi Party is the party of the middle class, of bureaucrats and white-collar workers, generally speaking, salaried employees.
And while it is true that the Nazi Party does find appeal in those groups, they are not the only ones by far. Let's look at another group, the blue-collar workers.
The two traditional workers' parties are the two self-professed Marxist parties in Germany, the Communists and the Social Democrats. In this election, they account for 43% of all workers, with 17% voting for the KPD and 26% for the SPD. Just over half of all KPD voters are workers, and almost 45% of all SPD voters are workers.
Which is just under half, okay. Well, in the case of the Nazis, 13% of all workers voted for them, comprising 27%, or just over a quarter of all their voters. While this makes them distinct from the traditional workers' parties, it does not make them not a workers' party.
Yeah, white-collar employees of all shapes and sizes make up 14% of all Nazi voters. Self-employed individuals and entrepreneurs make up 15%. Housewives make up 17%. And the unemployed 22%.
22%. The other party that was disproportionately successful with the unemployed is the communists, with them being more successful in regions with many unemployed blue-collar workers, and the Nazis being more successful in regions with more unemployed white-collar workers.
What all this shows is that, contrary to the other parties, the voter base of the NSDAP must be characterized as broad, indeed encompassing the entire population. It also contradicts conventional wisdom by showing that while Hitler is very popular with some women, he is not overly popular with women. Actually, the opposite is the case, with decidedly more men than women voting for the NSDAP.
Compared to 1928, the composition of those who vote Nazi has changed dramatically. One trend is that the Nazis are predominantly Protestants, but again, this does not mean that no Catholics vote for the Nazis. The strongest predictor of Nazi electoral success seems to be the share of independent craftsmen in each region, together with the share of the Protestant population.
The Nazis perform worse in highly urbanized and or industrialized regions. Here, the communists perform better. This makes sense if we remember the fact that more than half of the communists are workers, most of which are in factories.
All this seems to have made Hitler very optimistic, though. On the 25th, while speaking in front of the German Supreme Court in Leipzig, he firmly rejects any plans to violently overthrow the current establishment. Instead, he stresses he wants to enable the National Socialist Revolution within the confines of the Constitution.
If 2 or 3 more Reichstag elections take place, the National Socialist uprising will have to happen. When our movement is victorious, we will create a Supreme Court to bring the November criminals of 1918 to justice. This crime will be atoned for. I make no secret of it. Heads will roll.
On to the Weimar Wire Political Indicator, brought to you by Timeghost. Well, the election results speak for themselves. The Nazis are on the up, and up.
Communists are also trending firmly upwards, although not as sharply as the Nazis. Centrum, too, is trending upwards, although only slightly.
The SPD is trending slightly downwards, while the Burger Bloc trends firmly downwards.
And now, the most pressing questions on the minds of the Weimar citizens. Will Chancellor Brüning succeed with a minority government given that he failed last time?
Will the SPD again bring down the government in protest?
Have the Nazis reached the peak of their popularity, or will they soar to even higher heights?
Will the communists likewise continue their upward trend?
Can the Bürger parties ever recover?
Will heads roll? Well, we'll get some answers when we're back at the end of October. To get us there, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. That's what allows us to do all of this. And until then, Weimar Wire signing off. Excelsior!